Hello and welcome to this session on the do's and don'ts of coaching leadership. My name is Steven Poelmans and I'm a professor here at Antwerp Management School in Leadership and Applied Organizational Neurosciences. So today we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of coaching, and in order to get started, maybe it's good for you to get to know me a little bit better, not because of me, but because of the different domains I've been working in. This will be helpful maybe also to understand where the messages I'm going to give to you today are coming from. So if we turn to the slides and start the pointer, we can start the presentation. Wonderful. So my background is in psychology, industrial and organizational psychology. Overlap that with the field of management, business administration, but also, of course, the topic of leadership and coaching, which will be central today, but also with a bit of salt and pepper of the neurosciences. These are the different domains I'm combining together in order to talk about coaching and let myself be informed. But also a very important source of information is in the overlap between all those different circles. And in this overlap, we have the Neurotraining Lab. The Neurotraining Lab, maybe some of you have already heard about it, is a methodology. You can see a maquette here of how the Neurotraining Lab looks like. And basically, it's a leadership competency development methodology. So it's a methodology to develop leadership, among others also the skill of coaching. And it's very important to make the contrast with an assessment center. We do not work on selection and recruitment in the lab. Basically, our focus is on developing people's competencies, among others, coaching. And with observation of more than 12 years now, more than 1,000 managers who went through the lab, you start seeing the patterns. So the information I will share with you is not always only coming from research and from studies, but also our own observations of leaders in action in the Neurotraining Lab. This is the picture we have when we look at people from our perspective, because while we are observing people, we also have incoming information of people's EEG or electroencephalographic activity. And this gives us extra data in order to give even more precise feedback, which is then the motor of development. We register everything that people say, so we codify what people say in competencies, but what we also do is we look at people's non-verbal behavior, and that's also a very important aspect, especially in coaching, in how people dance in the moment in order to come to some type of a result. We have different labs around the world now, which also allows us to look at this topic more from a cross-cultural perspective. And these are some images of our lab here at Antwerp Management School. Those of you who have been to Antwerp Management School may have seen also this installation. As you can see on the left side, it really looks like a real office space, and that's also our goal is to create sufficient psychological safety, familiarity, but also what's very important is to make sure it is realistic, or what as we call it, naturalistic setting, in order to observe people in action. One of the most frequently asked questions, so I'm already going to give that away to you, is, well, Steven, when people come to the lab, isn't it a little bit, artificial? Can you really observe real behavior? Well, that's actually one of the first questions we ask as part of our protocol when people finish the exercise, which is, did the fact that cameras were pointed at you, that you know there's people watching you on the other side of a one-way mirror, did it in some way create an obstacle or make it difficult for you to concentrate and to do the, do the exercise? And I can tell you 95%, if not 97% of people say no. This is just a little moment in the beginning where you are aware of what's going on and you're so much absorbed into the exercise that you don't pay attention to that anymore. So I already dealt with the most frequently asked question. Very well, this all has resulted in a book, The Paradoxes of Leadership. For those of you who want to dive deeper into the topic of what we've learned after so many years of observing leaders in action. Here you have a reference handbook. Good, it's time to get started now with the topic of today. Okay, so the do's and don'ts of coaching leadership. Let's focus on the topic of today. As already announced on the website, these are some of the questions we're going to try to answer today, right? Is coaching a managerial responsibility? If so, is every manager suited to be a coach? Many other questions we're going to try to treat today. We're going to draw on different fields of research, as I have already indicated before, both in the terms of the fields of psychology, neuroscience, and management. And more importantly, this is sort of the overview of the schedule of today, the different topics we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of internal and external coaching, the critical success factors for coaching in organizations, what it means to be a coach with the brain and mind, a few indications about that, the premises behind and the benefits of situational coaching, which is probably a relatively new term I'm going to introduce today, and how coaching evolves along with career progression, which is also putting coaching more into the context of protean careers. Excellent. So that's the program of today, quite ambitious, so let's get started. Let's talk first about internal and external coaching. Well, the poll is quite clear. There is a almost unanimous certainty that yes, 75% says this is a managerial responsibility. About 70% say no, and we have a small percentage, 7%, who says other. I would love to look inside of the minds of the people who say other. I'm very curious. Well, if we take a closer look at this, and if we go back to the pointer, then we can dive a bit deeper into this question. All right, so this brings us to the concept of the leader coach. To be very clear, for today, we're not focusing on people who have decided to dedicate themselves professionally 100% to coaching. So professional coaches, executive coaches, life coaches. Today, as we are a management school, we focus on managers and leaders. And in that sense, in that context, we talk about the leader coach. Well, in that context, it depends. So maybe the people who said other are the ones who were right, the minority of 7%. So maybe it's not yes or no, it depends. But if you look at the conditions under which circumstances that coaching should definitely be a managerial responsibility, maybe the 75% will recognize themselves. So first of all, it depends heavily on the level of dependency and scarcity in the external labor markets. If you are working in very tight labor markets where there is a lot of scarcity, coaching can actually turn out to be essential for retaining talent. So coaching is not just a process through which a coach and a coachee work towards a result in order to become more focused, more productive, but also have an eye open for well-being. Well, in that sense, it is much more, right? Coaching is also a way of motivating people in checking in what is driving them, to check with them whether there's a good fit between the job and the person. And in that sense, it's an essential tool for retaining and motivating talent. A second point, if you work in a company or an environment where there's a heavy dependency on knowledge and service work, then absolutely, once again, coaching will be very, very important. Because in these knowledge and service-based organizations, we can no longer separate the person from the knowledge and the service. The person is the vessel, the bearer, the producer of this knowledge and this service. In other words, if the person is not feeling well, the product and the service is going to suffer. So individuals, people are completely integrated with a product and a service. In that sense, it is going to be very important to make sure that these people are productive and focused and feel well. And in that sense, once again, coaching can be an excellent resource and method to make sure that people continue develop those knowledge elements and develop better service. The third element, and I hope in the meantime you're checking, does this check for me? Yes, yes until now, or yes, no. And then maybe the people who said no may also be right. Well, the third point also is it depends on the desired leadership paradigm in your organization. The existing leadership paradigm or the desired leadership paradigm. So we have basically we can make a distinction between what are the basic values, goals, and related with that, what is the related vision, mission, and strategy of the organization. We will see later on, in order for coaching programs to be successful, they need to be closely tied with and integrated with these larger elements of vision, mission, and strategy. So it depends, once again. Let's take a closer look at it. And what is definitely clear that in third-generation organizations, which are purpose-driven, coaching is core to leadership. When I teach this in classes, I even talk about how purpose is the alpha and the omega of leadership. And coaching will be a good instrument to make sure to find out what is the purpose of individuals working in the organization, why are they working in this organization in the first place, what drives them, what is the why behind their efforts and their motivation, because if we don't take that into account, we can't connect individual people's purpose with the organizational purpose. And that's going to be very important and core in the third generation organization. There's a lot of text on this slide. I'm aware of this and I apologize. But this gives you sort of an overview of what a second generation organization looks like and what are the characteristics of second generation organizations. Let me summarize it for you. Basically, second generation organizations, and maybe you are working in a second generation organization, the basic premise is management by objectives. We basically drive and motivate people by setting clear objectives and making sure that they are well communicated and then evaluating on a periodic fashion whether people are reaching these objectives. And as all these objectives are a function of higher objectives that can be brought back eventually to the strategy and the vision of the organization, we have a well-functioning organization, right? In this context, management by objectives, the basic leadership paradigm is we leave a lot of autonomy and space for people to reach in their own particular way those objectives, right? And we actually encourage proactivity, efforts, hard work. We also encourage people to make up their own plans and to make sure that they reach those objectives. If that's the paradigm, maybe coaching is not necessary because the objectives are the ways of motivating people. But yet again, the world is evolving, right? And if we look at the premises of the third generation organization, we have a different philosophy. In the third generation organization, basically the logic is, hey, what if we could also accompany people in the process from going from point A to point B? What if we put somebody alongside of people trying to reach their objectives and give them coaching, right? So we can actually optimize the efficiency of the process of getting from point A to point B. So that's one of the many premises and characteristics of the third generation organization. And if that's core of your leadership paradigm, then yes, of course, coaching will be relevant. So let me walk and go through a moment the different characteristics of the third generation organization. It looks at a broader set of stakeholders beyond the shareholders, right? And if you want to deal with broad ranges of stakeholders who have a very a big variety of types of people and needs and expectations, coaching can help to adapt leadership styles in function of the people you have in front of you. Right? If you look at other elements that are important in these organizations of third generation, mission, purpose, and team objectives will become more important. And as I said before, now we need coaching to find out what is the purpose and what are the motivations of individual workers to connect these with organizational. And we work more in flat organizations, horizontal. To deal with that, to work in that type of environment may also require some supports. But more importantly, third generation organizations are also obsessed with making sure that knowledge is shared. So thinking about how we can do that. Coaching can also serve as a process in which we ask each other questions, listen to each other, hear each other out in order to learn what other people are thinking. So coaching is also a crucial process to exchange information, to learn about other people's mindsets and motivations. Of course, I mentioned this before, coaching can be a tremendously important method or tool to retain and develop talent, and the list goes on and on. So here you can see it, continuous feedback and coaching is going to be one of the core elements of the third generation organization. Look at all the other characteristics. If you look for ownership beyond people taking up their responsibility, but really taking up ownership and self-leadership, maybe we need to first help people, accompany people through coaching to make sure they acquire the skills of leading and managing themselves. So once again, even if we strive for self-leadership, probably before that, there's a process of coaching and helping to get people there. All right, so time to look at another piece of information at another poll. Well, once again, the results speak for themselves. Very clearly, we have a majority, 76% of people so no. Not every manager is suited to be coach. 14% said yes, and we have a 10% of others. The 10% is growing, maybe because of what happened in the previous question, where other realized it depends. And probably maybe what will be the right answer? Well, actually, once again, I have to be agreeing with the first option, no. And it was a bit of a trick question. I have to be honest with you. I like to play a bit. I was playing a bit because the way the question was phrased was a bit of a trick question. First of all, if you see a question or a phrase, or you see somebody speaking in terms of absolute terms, everybody, nobody, always, ever, we know from cognitive therapy that these are indications that maybe this person is exaggerating in their minds, and maybe we should, through coaching, take a closer look at what's going on here, right? Because these absolute terms are giving away what are the beliefs of this person. So if you see these absolute terms, be careful. So every manager, well, I don't think so, right? The second is, it is asked in the present tense. Is every manager now suited? Maybe that now, right? Maybe that now, but maybe if we give them the right training and the developments, they can become suited. So in that sense, maybe if that was the question that the people who said yes had in the back of their mind, that could every manager, or can every manager become, or through training, suited to become a coach, maybe the answer is different, right? So let's take a closer look at that. And let's contrast, in that sense, the manager-director with the leader-coach, right? And I'm going to contrast them. But those who know me a bit and have seen me before in classes or in sessions and webinars, you know that I'm a big lover of paradoxical thinking, right? And I already want to announce that this is a paradox, right? It is not either or, it is and. What we actually do at Antwerp Management School in our programs is to make sure we develop both sides in people. And we look for both people who are good in managing and directing and leading coaching. So let's take a closer look at the skills, the behaviors we typically also see in a neurotraining lab according to these two different roles that people can play. So yes, the manager director, he or she is supposed to, is expected to argue, to instruct, to give very clear indications in function of the vision of the strategy of the organization, and needs to explain why the company is taking this particular direction. Correct if people are deviating from the course of action. Imagine or make assumptions also to make sure to try to guess what's going on in the mind of clients in order to adapt certain products and services in function of the changing demands of the client. He or she needs to seek control. We expect from managers to make sure there is control, there is order, there is structure, and to make sure that we follow the structure in order to get to results. Sometimes needs to give orders, especially in times of crisis. There's no time to sit down and to have a more participative approach, and we need to move forwards, right? The focus is on the what. They work on something which is the result. The result is fundamental. We need to get things done. Getting things done is very important in this type of mindset. And the manager will assign responsibility, will respect the chain of command and delegate to people tasks and responsibilities in order to get things done. And maybe also this director manager keeps a bit of a distance because the manager director is also very concerned about fairness and maybe not getting too close to people because employees are not friends. We also have to have a clear relationship of clarity, and maybe a little bit of distance is not bad. But no buts. Paradoxical thinking does not work with but. Paradoxical thinking works with and, both. Let's take a look at the other side. Let's look at the yin of the yang of the coaching leader or leader coach. There we see quite different types of behaviors, which are easy to contrast, but as a yin and yang, black and white, together they create a whole, right? It is actually what we've learned in the neurotraining lab, the switching between those different roles, which makes an interesting synergy or multiplication, which is probably what we truly expect from a good leader, right? So it's not about leaving behind what I just said, it's about switching back and forth between those different types of behaviors. But there's clearly a shift, right? The leader coach will spend much more time asking questions. In essence, coaching is the art and practice of asking really good questions. One of my favorite ways of describing coaching is a coach probably asks all those questions that the collaborator or coachee should ask him or herself. It's sort of like the responsibility of the leader coach is to become the consciousness and the conscience of the collaborator and help them ask questions that they should ask themselves in order to get to a certain result. So yes, listening, asking questions, anticipating in order, through those questions, anticipating possible future states. For instance, asking questions like, what if this and this and this would happen? What would be your approach? In that sense, through scenario thinking, we can help our collaborator to prevent and anticipate that situation. Definitely seeks engagement. Seeks engagement through the process of generation. And generation is a concept that comes from neuroscience. And basically it says that if the person, him or herself, generates the answer, you have immediate buy-in. If you give the answer, there is the not invented here syndrome. Are you sure? Why are you saying this? Why are you saying this? Well, it's you who's saying this. You have a different perspective. I don't necessarily agree, right? So through questioning, through asking questions, what we do as leader coaches is we make sure that the collaborator generates the answer. And if they generate the answer, right, we already have 50% of their engagement. because who would not believe in their own thoughts or ideas? So yes, a coach is also very much important in stimulating and engaging the person in that sense. Sometimes I refer to coaching as being a cheerleader, right? Actually, research has shown that a very large percentage of the impact that a coach has on a collaborator is by infusing them with enthusiasm, in animating them, in making sure there are positive emotions, that there is optimism, that there is a bright way ahead, that there are possibilities, that there are opportunities, right? Richard Boyatzis in that context talks about positive emotional attractors. So coaches work with positive emotional attractors, basically with the concept of, yes, we can make things happen. They work with people, of course, the process is more fundamental. So in that sense, yes, the coach is in control, but not of the content. The coach is in control of the process and making sure that we get from point A to point B. Yeah? And in coaching training, having a process is going to be very, very important. Make sure that the employee, the collaborator, assumes his or her responsibility, right? And seeks to connect. The connection is also very important. That's something else we have seen and observed in the Neurotrain Lab over and over again. Without an emotional connection, you cannot be an inspirational leader. Without the emotional connection between two people, and that can be as simple as or as difficult as creating a connection of trust, it is very difficult, right, to have a productive coach-coachee relationship. So yes, that's also an important aspect. Very well. We can also contrast the role of external and internal coaches, right? Because that's one of the questions we also asked in order to find out what people think, right? So external coaches, they have a very different approach, right? When we speak about external coaches, to be absolutely clear, these are now professionals dedicated fully to coaching, probably also trained through many rounds of professional coaching, maybe even certified by international or local recognized institutions. So these are people who are completely focused on coaching. That's their bread and butter, as they say. Okay, so yes, they have a very different approach and focus. They will be focusing on the science and art of development, how to develop people. That's what they're really good at, and we need to recognize this. They are trained for that, they're focused on that. So that's going to be an advantage of working with an external coach, right? It's an external outsourced service, and we will see that this might be an advantage or a disadvantage. The advantage is that maybe they have more of a neutral stance. They can be more neutral, and they don't have any favorites or they don't have any party they want to lean towards to. And in certain coaching processes, neutrality can be an important asset. They focus on coaching, development, they focus on methods and techniques. That is what they're trained in methods and techniques of developing people, right? They help their coaches reach results. And basically, and what in their world, in their worldview, in their day-to-day activity, well, they're professional coaches. They live from coaching, so they have to make sure they have sufficient clients. And so commercially, in the back of their minds, we can not ignore it. We have to call a cat a cat. They're always looking for subjects for people to work with as a coach. So that's also something to take into account. Trust in expertise is going to be very important. So if an employee evaluates an external coach, they will evaluate their level of competency and expertise in coaching. And that's what they will test. I've worked both as an internal and as an external coach. I can tell you, sometimes coachees will test you up to the second and third session, even to see, are you competent? And once they find that you're competent, it turns almost into blind trust. So now I put myself in your hands. Very important as well, we should not forget also the bottom line and the financial aspects. Typically, professional coaches work with an hourly rate, and this counter can clock very quickly. It can run up very quickly when we have a lot of people to coach. Let's contrast this now with the elements of internal coaches. And when I say internal coaches, now I talk about employees in the organization, managers, or maybe even not managers, who may have an interest in coaching, who have volunteered, and who are engaged in a larger scale program within the organization to take up the role of coaching. This can also be the case for managers who have taken up and integrated coaching as an important tool to manage people and to lead people towards higher results. So also want to be clear about the concept of internal coach. So here we have now people who are more focused on management and leadership. They're more knowledgeable about the business, the organizational culture, the politics. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is crucial, right? So an external coach, yes, they can do their homework, they can study the organization, but they will never ever understand as good as the leader coach how the company works. They know it from the inside out and from the outside in. And so in that sense, this is a huge advantage to work with leader coaches, to navigate the politics in the organization. In order to get to results, you need to be knowledgeable about that aspect as well. Right? So that's a very important aspect here. So here we have in-house people who have a better focus on business management. In other words, what leader coaches will also do probably more distinctively is make sure that the coaching process is completely integrated with the other process, which is in the organization very important, which is working towards objectives and performance. And in that sense, internal coaches or leader coaches are more focused on results, on control and delegation. And that's one other very important advantage of working with internal coaches. We can link the coaching process with the process of progressive delegation. And those of you who are familiar with the model of Hershey and Blanchard of situational leadership, you know that you shouldn't go to delegation too soon with immature and inexperienced workers. It's a process. So now the manager, who has a very good oversight of the content of the job of his collaborator, can actually use coaching in order to help the collaborator to make steps forward in developing maturity, knowledge, experience to get to the point where they're ready to be delegated upon. So as you can see, there's a bunch of advantages on both sides. In that sense, I hope I've given you the right criteria to make the right decisions. Right? Last but not least, there's also a trust issue here, where maybe, once again, the external coach has an advantage. In order for a collaborator to trust his boss, because supervisor, because that's what we're talking about here, they need to trust also in their rank, their experience and competency, right? And that might become problematic. If this relationship is troubled, it has undergone some type of contamination, maybe it's interesting to work with an external coach. Let me give you an example. If the issue that is going on is that there's a troubled relationship that's maybe actually part of a more general problem of toxic leadership in the organization, maybe this trust into the rank and experience and competency has been broken. And then, once again, it might be very important to switch to an external party who can take up this neutral position and help people back on the way, right? And last but not least, well, we have to call a CAT. A CAT, the leader coach, is on the payroll, is paid anyway for the services and products and the service he provides and she provides inside of the organization. So from a financial point of view, this may also be a very important argument. Okay, so let's take a deep breath, because I know there's a lot of topics going on today and time flies, but I hope you appreciate for me to give you the criteria to make your own decisions rather than just saying how it is or how it is not. So let's take a look at another chapter now within the presentation of today, which are the critical success factors for coaching in organizations. And here I'm going to put up another hat, right? Now I'm going to talk a little bit more as the professor in order to also share with you research that has been done in this field and to give you some tips and tricks of what we've learned now of what are the conditions, the conditions in order for coaching to work in organizations. But maybe it's a very good time now to take another poll and take a look at the result. All right, so it's interesting to see now we have a more even distribution between those who say yes formally and yes formally and systematically, but sum those two up, we can see that people basically in their polls are saying that yes, in most companies nowadays, coaching is encouraged. And of course, we can link this with the previous poll result that in 75% of the cases, coaching is considered as a managerial responsibility. So, but we can see here also that almost half of it, it's still the case that it is encouraged informally, and there's no real structural or systematic approach behind this. And in that sense, I think this webinar is going to be useful, especially for those of you who work in those organizations where coaching is not just a structural and formal policy in the organization. We're going to do a look at another poll, which is interesting to look at right away after this one.
Yes, so let's launch the next poll where we will find out whether or not you think that coaching works in organizations in general. So let's have a look what you think there. Okay, thank you for answering this numerously. Thank you. Let's have a look at the results.
All right, so looking at the results of the poll this time, we have a vast majority. This is the highest number we've seen until now in the poll of 82% of people who say, yes, it works. We have 3% who says no. So unfortunately, we seem to have a few people that have not so good experiences there. But we also have a growing group of others who say 60% this time of other. And I once again have to side, or this time I have to side with the people who say other, because once again, it depends. And in that sense, maybe those of you who said yes, said yes because you have seen it work because the right conditions were there. Okay, so let's take a closer look then at the conditions for having successful coaching in organizations. And I could cite a lot of research, but I need to focus because time is limited. And so I'm going to focus on one of the most comprehensive studies that have been done in that sense, the Coaching Research Project. And if you look at the numbers here and the information here, you see that the study has been well done, right? It's a study by East London Business School, with working together with various organizations. It's based on an unprecedented, at that point in time, of evaluating and integrating both primary and secondary sources of information, and look at also previous studies. So it integrated both literature review, research done up that point, but also their own research. An international survey among 144 coaches in 20 countries. So even also looking possibly at international differences, but also looking not just at quantitative data, also qualitative data. People were also interviewed, both coaches and managers, and also another 150 secondary sources, like for instance, experts in the field were consulted. In other words, yes, the people here at East London Business School did their homework, all right? Let's take a look at what they found. And so we switch back to the pointer in order to look at the results. Excellent. So here are some of the conditions. It's a long list pay attention because I have to go through them quite quickly. All right, first, very important, there needs to be a consistency of the coaching program with the overall business vision and strategy. I referred to that before, so no need to go back to that once again, right? Very important, when coaching was not well defined in specific programs, if it was not well explained what was meant with coaching and what was what people would try to reach through coaching, things started to go really bad. So it's very important to, with all the people who are organizing the coaching program or policy in the organization, to define very clearly with what is meant with coaching. Right? And very much related with that is to be very transparent around the coaching concept. To give a bit of an extreme example, so you will get immediately what we're talking about here, right? In one of the organizations, coaching was actually activated and used when there was a clear deviation in individuals between objectives and performance. In other words, it was not pronounced, as pointed out in the second point, and there was no transparency around the fact that basically coaching was a corrective mechanism. It was only used for people who were not performing well. First of all, really bad way to get started, as you can imagine, right? But this is why I gave this example to make clear, don't take this for granted. Don't assume that everybody understands coaching as a developmental tool. And that's going to be very important. Choosing the appropriate level of penetration, what does that mean? Are we going to offer coaching at all the levels of the organization? And if not, up to which level are we going to offer coaching, right? So that's also very important to be very clear about from the beginning in order to manage expectations. And if you decide to stop at a certain level of the organization where coaching is not provided, what are the alternatives? Make sure there's a win-win for all stakeholders involved, right? In order to make the coaching a success. For instance, I have accompanied a company in Spain when I was still working there. So in this organization, I accompanied this organization with creating a better work-life balance, better harmony between work, personal life, and family. And coaching was an aspect to that, right? Here, a very important stakeholder was not just the employees and the directors and the leaders, but also people back at home. What is a credible program, right? If you only consider employees when we talk about work and family, and we don't think about the people back home, the partners, the spouses, and the children. So in this case, actually the spouses were in a very early stage also involved in the process, announcing, yes, your husband, your wife, your partner will also receive coaching, and they will be thinking about the issues that we're interested in creating a better harmony. In other words, those partners were involved in a very early stage and also to become a supporter of this whole program. What else? Well, here are a bunch of criteria that you will recognize because they can also be recognized in any good change management program. Start with the top. So most of the companies I've worked with that asked me to implement coaching in organizations, I've started with the top. If top managers are willing to also lend themselves to coaching and to be coached, go through the process, experience the benefits of it, you can imagine that they become supporters and ambassadors of coaching themselves. And so starting with the top is not just telling or informing or asking permission from top management, is actually also involving them in the coaching process, right? Very important. It's sort of a follow-up with what we said before. Very important is to market coaching as a development tool, right? To make sure that there's integrity and quality at all levels. In other words, also the issue of privacy is going to be very important. I will come back to this point in a moment. That there is a systemic and systematic development of the program, and not just loose shots from the hip. Make sure that there is a well-thought process with Are we going to start with the whole company? Are we going to start with a certain pilot group? Are we going to offer it to particular departments first? Are we going to start with risk group first, right? To give that also some real good thought. And of course, as always, make sure you evaluate as you go along and also towards the end that are we having a good impact? And in order to make sure that there is impact and privacy, which can also be contrasting values, we have to look at this triangle. This is going to be crucial to have a successful coaching program. This is a triangle between the collaborator or the coachee, between the leader coach and the coach, and very important, the organization. And sometimes in some companies, right, the supervisor may not coincide with the leader coach, right? That's the case if we work with external coaches. So this is a bit making clear what's going on here. It's going to be very important to have very clearly defined goals, roles, and expectations. So to contrast, what is the role of the leader? What is the role of the external coach? So they know exactly, each one of them, what is expected from them. And what we will see is that the goals or the objectives of the coaching process will be shared between all three parties, right? This is not going against privacy, because what remains private is the content, the process of the coaching process. This remains private. What people, the coach and the coachee talk about, that can, what the external coach and the coachee talk about, that can remain private. But the objectives of the coaching will be shared with those three parties. We need a clear vision, of course, from the organization coming, why coaching is important, and this needs to be also clearly defined and clearly explained to the collaborator. Why are we doing coaching in the first place? I talked about this before. And very important, of course, between the supervisor, the coachee, between the leader coach and the collaborator, there needs to be psychological safety, right? There needs to be trust in order to have clear development goals, but also have a process that is protected and that is clear. So let's go to the next chapter in this presentation, coaching with the brain and mind. Obviously, ideally, I would love to teach a whole class on this topic, but that's not possible here. I just want to give you a bit of a taste in the mouth to have an idea, a few samples of coaching principles that are derived from the neurosciences. And the first one, undoubtedly, is this one here. This is a basic operational principle for the brain. The brain is wired to avoid threats and seek rewards. It seems like this is a very hedonistic principle. It's all about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. But there's an important word really missing in this definition, which is the brain is especially wired also for social threats and social rewards. Now, why is this an important principle also for the leader coach? Is if coaching is only used to correct behavior and not to encourage behavior, then we have already started off on the wrong foot. So leader coaches work, as I have mentioned before, with these positive emotional attractors, especially works with the rewards. And it's a question of using the right wording, of using words like challenges instead of problems. What's in a word? Well, there's a lot in the word, but it also means to keep the eye on the ball. What does that mean? Not to go back in time, look for people who are culpable or responsible, looking for scapegoats, looking for the reasons behind the reasons behind the reasons. No, but to keep the eye on the future, right? A leader coach is focused on getting results. And so focusing on the rewards. And what are the rewards in this case is and that's an essential question to ask really early on in the coaching process is, how will you know that this coaching process has been successful, right? What will you be able to do differently? How will you feel differently? And so really to keep the focus on the future and the future states, on the possibilities and on the path forward. Another principle, which is of course essential in coaching, is the principle of neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity refers to the characteristic of the brain, the capacity for change, adaptation, and learning. Right? And I can tell you amazing stories how people at the most advanced stages in life, surpassing the age of 60 and 65, are still capable of the most amazing things, of even after an accident or a tumor in the brain, learn to speak and talk again. Rewiring the brain in such a way that the damaged areas in the brain that are no longer usable can be circumvented, and the brain can rewire itself to take up that function again, develop that function once again from scratch, as if like you cut off your left hand and you grow a new one. That's really what the brain is capable of doing. And of course, that's a principle to work with, to keep in mind, and to keep in the back of the mind while we're coaching people. What's important to know is it's hard to change the wiring of the brain. So people that have really strongly established habits, and of course, the extreme of strongly established habits can be so strong that it's going to be very difficult to change that. But that's also not the goal of coaching, and not even of management or leadership. We cannot change people, and that's not our goal. That should not be our pretension. But we can develop people, and that's not, once again, playing with words. It's actually a very important issue, right? It's not about changing, it's about developing. And this brings us to the second part of this message in neuroplasticity. It is relatively easy to develop new connections. What basically a good coach or leader coach does is think about alternative paths that will allow to reach the same goal with the same level of gratification or more. That's not always easy, it's not always obvious, and that's what the whole coaching process is about, in exploring that alternative path, so people don't have to go through the usual path anymore, which is the habits. Now, in order to go through the new path, what we need is, first of all, conceive and design this new path, and then practice, practice, practice. What we will also need to do is make sure that it becomes more difficult or not convenient, and even maybe prohibit or make it even impossible for people to go through the old path again. So that's a second principle that is absolutely crucial in coaching. But I also want to connect this with more good news. And more good news is that developing alternative paths, these alternatives, the number of alternatives are quasi-infinite. And the reason for that is this. This is the principle of extensive interconnectivity of the brain. If we multiply the number of neurons that we have in our brain, and Susana Herculano Roussel, a Brazilian researcher, has actually found a method to count the number of neurons we have. And you see the numbers here on the screen. The numbers are staggering, but it doesn't stop there. If we multiply the number of neurons with the number of neural interconnections, which happens through the axons and the dendrites, where different neuron cells interconnect with each other, these are not just one or two or a few interconnections. No, neurons are interconnected through 1,000 to 30,000 synapses. Now, if we stay with a very moderate and modest estimation, which is 1,000, not 30,000, and we multiply these numbers, we come to a completely mind-blowing number, 86 trillion synaptic connections. To put this a little bit into context, right, because these numbers are so big that we can't wrap our minds around it. Well, 86 trillion neural connections in the brain, right, that's 86 with 12 zeros. Well, compare this with the number of stars in the galaxy. We have about between 100 and 400 billion stars in our galaxy. Just to make clear, right, this is a 100 with 9 zeros behind it. So if you compare those numbers, basically in essence, if we look at the number of neural interconnections and possibilities, we have like a few, well, more than a few galaxies between our two ears. And that's the other thing that a good leader coach does, is to draw upon all those possibilities, stimulate the creativity in the collaborator for him or her to come up with all those possible alternative paths, and then supporting, accompanying in making sure that these paths become more specific with intermediate goals, with milestones in order to get to the ultimate goal. So these are 3 neuroscience principles, and as I said, this is just a little tip of the iceberg, because when we teach the course Coaching Skills for Leaders, we dive much deeper in all those different neuroscience principles and look at how they translate into coaching practice. The next chapter I want to talk about quickly is this new concept of situational coaching, relatively new concept of situational coaching. And situational coaching, to start with a high-level executive summary, is basically the capability to adapt your coaching style in function of the coaching needs of the person sitting in front of you. And so it's basically translating situational leadership to the specific situation of coaching. So here we have the definition. Situational coaching consists in adapting one's natural coaching style to the expectations and needs of the coachee. Now there are 2 elements here, and this is another thing that we dive deep into when we do programs on coaching. First of all, there's a reflection, a deep reflection on what is your natural coaching style. And typically in function of your personality, your cognitive styles, right? Are you more of an analytical or a synthetic type of thinker? Are you more of a thinker or a feeler? Are you more of a data-driven sensor or a experience-based intuitive person? And so in function of all those different personality characteristics and cognitive styles, you will have a particular preference of how to coach people. So that's the first element in the equation. But we also have to look at who's sitting in front of us. And also in function of this particular person's setup, ambitions, personality, values, the list is long, this person will have a particular expectation towards the coach or leader coach. So now we have 2 elements in the equation, and these need to be matched, they need to be aligned. Research suggests that in a relationship of mentorship, and we mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention before, but I need to mention that mentorship and coaching is different. Mentors are typically more experienced people in or outside the organization that can give tips and tricks and advice. And maybe mentors also use coaching as a tool. But in mentor-mentoree relationship, it has been shown in research that giving a choice to the mentoree with which mentor to work, so there's some level of chemistry, is crucial for the impact and the success of the mentor relationship. I think we can do something similar in a coaching relationship. There needs to be a match, there needs to be some level of chemistry, right? Now, in the case of a leader coach, you cannot just simply change the manager, right? The manager is who he or she is. And therefore, this matching or this adaptation is going to be even more crucial. I'm going to take it a step further. What we learned in the neurotraining lab is that paradoxical coaching is very important. It's sort of an extreme form of situational coaching. It's not just a question of adapting yourself to the person and the situation. It's even adapting your coaching style with the same person in the same situation. And it's basically the capability of switching back and forth between different coaching styles in function of the shifting needs of the coachee during the process, even within the same process on the same day, right? Well, let me give an example, right? A coach is supposed in this coaching process to have some moments where the coach takes absolute control and is a bit directive in the style by saying, these are the goals that we need to reach, this is the process we're going to follow, and I will tell you how it is. I'm not going to do this in a participative way, but in other parts, obviously, we need to switch to another style, and now it's a more participative, empathetic style where we ask questions and we hear people out. But then maybe towards the end of the session, we have to switch back to the other style and say, okay, let's go back and let's draw some conclusions here. And now this is what I want you to do. I want you to do some homework. I want you to do some reflection between now and the next session. So you switch back to this more directive style. So that's the concept of paradoxical coaching, even changing your style with the same person in the same situation. Very well. Let's take a look at the last part of this video, this session on coaching, the do's and don'ts of coaching. And this is where we're going to try to put it back into a larger context of the career development of an individual. And in order to understand this better, we need to really look at this concept of the protean career. You may have encountered this idea before. This is actually a picture of Proteus, a Greek mythological figure that was known to be a shape shifter who could change shape and use that characteristic in order to get things done in his way. Now we probably know a more recent shapeshifter. This is Mystique. You may recognize her of the science fiction movie, right? She's also a shapeshifter. She can change her body in function of what's happening and to her benefit. And that's basically the idea of the protean career, right? We need to shift our shape in the course of a lifetime, over the course of a career. The times that the career was designed and basically controlled and steered from the organization is over, right? The time that you had one career in one company is becoming very rare. And so the concept of a protean career is that it is self-directed. It is driven by the person, not by the organization. And this is going to be very important in this environment which becomes more and more complex to predict, right? We need to adapt. We need to adapt, and in order to navigate this environment, we need to be able to self-direct our career. But it's not just self-directed, it is also value-directed. And so this concept of Briscoe and Hall that talk about the person's internal values that provide guidance and measure of the success of individuals' careers. Here we have to make a distinction between what we call objective and subjective criteria of career success. Objective career criteria are measurable. These are things like how much money are you making, how much promotions did you make, what is your level in the organization, what is your level of budget responsibility, etc., etc. But we also have what we call subjective career success. And that's nothing to do with something that's easy to measure because it's subjective. It is a function of the individual's level of sense of satisfaction and fulfillment with their own career. Right? And for the second part, these internal values are going to be very important. Right? And in a context where we see that more and more a sense of purpose is important to motivate people, this is going to be crucial. So the idea is that there's a tendency to look for jobs that satisfy life needs, not just work needs. And if you take into account this tendency, especially in younger generations, and the protean career should come central to the way we also design careers for ourselves and in organizations. Right? These values, they guide individuals in the selection and evaluation of behaviors and situations across life sectors. And they become fundamental in people's career choices. So these values don't just influence the choices we make in our career, at our work, but also in our private life. And the idea is that individuals cannot be simply split up between an individual at work and an individual at home or an individual in the family. In that sense, once again, coaching is going to be an important way of, first of all, getting access to this realm outside of work, to question and to ask and to bring that inside of work in a sphere of psychological safety and privacy. But we cannot ignore, right, this work, the situation outside of work, because when we make career decisions, we need to take into account the private situation of the person. In the Protean career, we'll also have more interest in people having the opportunity to use and develop their talents in the organization, to follow their sense of purpose in the organization and find a way through their work to realize their life purpose. And that's a whole different cat, right? That does not pertain to the realm of the manager. This now belongs to the domain of the coach or the leader coach. So let's make this very, very practical, right? Let's just use a metaphor. Imagine that in order to help a person to go from point A to point B, we decide that coaching is a way to go. Okay, so we can look at different aspects in this journey. Right? First of all, we need a ship to cross the sea. We need to take a closer look at the ship. Do we have the adequate ship to cross the sea? Right? Maybe you've been successful now in order to secure a promotion, and this ship that you have now, which is you, your body, your talents, your experience, right, your capabilities, your competencies, was adequate in the previous journey. But now we're not just going to sail from point A to point B on the same side of the coast. No, we're going to cross over to a different coast. Maybe we need a more, better, stronger, better equipped ship. Second, we need to take into account what are the currents and the winds. If we don't take into account the broader context of what's going on, right, we're probably making a mistake. So here coaching can help to help the person ask the question he or she should ask him or herself in what are the circumstances, the changing circumstances in the labor markets, in your sector, in your type of organizations. Then the most obvious thing is to go from A to B in a one straight line. But we know life does not work that way. Right? We will encounter obstacles in the midst of the way. So how are you going to deal with those obstacles? Once again, coaching is going to be a way of helping people to think that through. Not by saying, this is the way, no. Once again, by asking questions, asking good and powerful questions to make people think for themselves, right? How am I going to deal with these obstacles? Or am I going to go this way? Am I going to go the other way? Or I'm going to go straight through, right? These are different options, different paths to discover, different paths to run through in scenario planning and to decide which is the best path. If we go deeper and we sort of dissect these different elements, what the coach and the coachee have to work on is to look at, first of all, what's the direction? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of taking this direction, right? It's also taking a hard look at, do you know yourself? Are you aware of your strengths and your limitations, right? Are you aware of the limitations of your boat, and are you willing to strengthen your boat, to make it bigger, to make bigger sails, to make sure you have sufficient provision and to make the crossing? Do you have, in other words, the right competencies for this next stage in your career, right? Are you aware of the changing currents and the changing winds, right? What about other people traveling with you? Who is there to support you in your network to make this next step in your career a success, right? Who are possibly mentors who can help you and guide you to deal with those obstacles that we will meet. We know that we will meet them. What is their experience? When they met those obstacles, what did they do, right? So they can give you advice around how to deal with these obstacles when you come across them. And last but not least, do you have sufficient flexibility, right, in order to deal with those different currents, to sail with the ship that you have, right, to expand your network, to go out and find mentors etc., etc. So in that context, once again, coaching can be of tremendous help to make sure that people do not overlook any of these elements, and so they go from point A to point B, not in the fastest way, but in the most efficient way. And a way that's not just good for productivity, but is also at a sustainable way, which is good for well-being and health. So, coming to the end of this presentation, I wanted to share with you what is the content of the program we offer here at Antwerp Management School, which is a program Coaching Skills for Leaders. And as you go over this schedule, you will see that yes, we dive much deeper in those neuroscience principles. It's a red thread, a fil rouge that goes straight through the whole program. But we also look at different, what we call meta competencies of the leader coach in order to be a good coach. A good coach is capable of managing information, managing emotions, managing people, and managing time and energy. And we will dive deeper in each of these elements in order to gain insights, but also to develop methods and techniques that can help you by being a better coach. And throughout the whole program, that's another fil rouge going through the whole program, there's also an issue of making sure you have a process. We talked about this before. Having a clear and good process is very important. And we will work for that from the beginning till the end, because in different points throughout the program, we will pass, we will reflect, we will practice, and we will do. We will get some feedback based on those experiences and go back to the cycle and go back to reflection and learning, coupling what we've learned back to the theory. Right? So there's this constant cycling through those different elements of getting good inputs, theoretical and academic inputs, of reflecting on them, on practicing them, on getting feedback and going back to work. For those of you who want to go even further, also part of this program of coaching skills for leaders, but that's optional. You can also choose to have a neurotraining lab experience before and after the program, so you can see your evolution, and coaching throughout the program. So to add another layer to make sure that we individualize, customize the learning to your specific person. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that the messages that I have given to you in the course of this session will be useful. My idea is to give you the criteria so you can make your own decisions, sort of practicing what I preach, also as a coach and leader coach. Good luck with it. I'm looking forward to see you again. Bye-bye.